Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop, and we are back in the workshop this time. We're in the trim shop in the workshop, to be more precise, and I have a very special guest here today, somebody whose family have been almost a household name in prestige car circles for many decades, and have the almost unique position of supplying the vast majority of the world's best car manufacturers for decades without them sort of objecting about it. And that is Connolly Leather, the byword for automotive leather quality. So I'm going to introduce Jonathan Connolly. Jonathan, thank you very much for
you're welcome.
For coming. And you brought, this is the first time your archive has ever left your premises.
There's a very small section of our archive that I brought up here today, and it is actually the first time in 120 odd years since it has left the rest of the archive. But I thought you would be interested to see how it was created over a century of history. And,
wow, this is a privilege and an honour, it really is. So this is your Cardex system for early leather?
Yeah, so the archive runs to about 4,000 colours. And they're leathers that we've made since the 1900s, the early 1900s, all the way through to the present day. And it's a number system for the colours. And most of the manufacturers like Ferrari and Rolls-Royce and Aston Martin would use our product code numbers on the build sheet. And when we've got a restoration going and a client from America will ring up and say, it was originally this colour number, but I've no idea what it is, we can then go to the archive and manufacture the leather for him, should he so wish.
Right. But you told me just previously that your great-uncle dealt personally with Enzo Ferrari, for example.
Well, he actually, Uncle Fred was second generation, so the business was started in 1878 by Samuel Frederick Connolly. Originally, they were making bridles for horses, and then they were making upholstery leather for carriages. And then when the horse was replaced with the internal combustion engine, it was a sort of natural progression. And then when my great-uncle Fred took over after the First War, he was there and we were there at the start of the British motor industry. So he was great friends of William Lyons, Herbert Austin, William Morris, and all of those guys. And the Ferrari story is a slightly different one in that our Italian agent, who had been our agents in Italy since the First War, knew the Commendatore, and when he started making motor cars, he rang his old friend and said, I'd like the same leather that you are selling in Italy that is in Rolls-Royce. And that's how we started supplying Ferrari in 1947. And in fact, 2022 is our 75th anniversary of our relationship with Maranello.
Incredible. And you're also mentioning that a very popular colour that we've actually retrimmed Daytonas in here, that sort of lovely, vibrant, orangey tan almost, VM3218.
Yes.
That's a colour going back pre-Ferrari.
Oh, yes. That colour was originally used by Austin, funnily enough, in the very early 30s. And it would have been adopted by Ferrari because our agent in Italy would have said, these are the colours that are available. And he would have probably just said, oh, I like that colour. And it just progressed to be one of their favourite colours.
Yeah. But you brought some incredible bits and pieces with you here, and this is the first time it's left your premises.
Well, yes, it is. A lot of it, especially this, which is a very small percentage of the archive, which is a card system. So we have this book here, which is by colour shade, so that if a client in somewhere has the original sample but doesn't know the number, we can identify it through this book, which, as you can see, has all the various different shades that go back, from the early 20s, and some amazing ones with a sort of turquoise and things like that. So, and then from there we get the color number, and then this card system will reveal the color. And normally on the card it'll have the type of leather, Vomol, and normally it will say the first year this was made. This one was first made in 1950, and that's the only information that's on there. So we won't have every single client that used this color because simply there'd be just too much information to go on it.
Yeah. And you had some unusual clients, didn't you? The Ministry of Defence during the Second World War.
Well, during both wars, we were obviously we were helping the war effort and making boot leather for the army in the First War, and in the Second War, certainly there were Lancaster bombers and Spitfires and things like that with Connolly Leather in, certainly.
Amazing. And moving forward to the 1960s, was it the QE2 was originally?
Yeah, the early 60s, the QE2. And in fact, we have here today the range of leathers. There were about 1,500 hides, I think, that went to make all the interiors of the QE2. We actually made a special range for Cunard. And so in the archive, we have the amount of leather that was in each individual room in the QE2. You'll see here, we've got, captain's accommodation. He had a Q3, which is only had 350 square feet, which is probably about 5 hides. So that's the colour that was in the captain's accommodation, for instance. So,
But that phone call from Cunard, that's the sort of phone call you like as a business, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned Heath Robinson, the cartoonist.
Yes, well, he was originally an artist, Heath Robinson, and of course couldn't make very much money as a jobbing artist, but he was incredibly good at making cartoons and things like that. And so quite a lot of them, artists like Heath Robinson, used to sell their talents to commercial businesses because there was no sort of television advertising or anything like that. So he worked for us for many years, creating a series of cartoons, some funny ones about leather machinery and that type of thing. And we had a way of measuring the area of leather, and it was a very intricate, complicated machine. And he said to my great-grandfather when he saw it, he said, I'm afraid I can't improve on that, Mr. Connolly. So and there are about 450 original Heath Robinson cartoons, which we still have.
Wow. Gosh. What I'm getting is there were a lot of personal relationships around this business, weren't there? Enzo Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, but the motor industry was like that in the beginning, and it wasn't until the motor industry changed in the early 90s, where manufacturing of motor cars started to be, they started to subcontract. So seating and trim used to be outsourced. So, for instance, when Jaguar was sold to Ford, they closed the trim shop at Browns Lane and outsourced all the trim. And that was a real change for us because our whole business had been about the personal relationships. I mean, Jaguar is a great example. Every Thursday for 60 years, there was a Connolly in the trim shop at Browns Lane. And when I was young, I used to call on them every Thursday morning, and I used to know the name of every single cutter there. And there were 72 of them cutting by hand around wooden templates. And this is in the 80s. And always had to go and see the shop steward first. Otherwise, he'd get very upset. And then you would...
Welcome to British industry.
Yeah, go around being harangued by all the trips. But it was great, and they were great times. But I think that the motor industry changed, and all motor car firms are like that pretty much, where they make a lot of the stuff is brought in and they're really assembling the car.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the relationships changed. So before then, you're right, it was we were very personally connected with all of our clients.
Right. So you brought some hides along here.
Yeah.
And they're obviously very different. I mean, that black one is...
So yeah, I thought I'd bring some leather that would show you how the leather has sort of changed over the years. And here's a hide. This has actually just recently been made by our classic department for a Lancia Lambda. For a client.
1920s?
In the early 20s, yes. And in those days, there wasn't a great range of colours. It was because of the technology of finishing it and pigments. You've got sort of browns and dark reds and that sort of thing.
What pigments would be used?
Well, they would use normal pigments, but the finishes were, in those days, were very, very basic, and they wouldn't clean terribly well. And it wasn't until the late 20s when we developed the Vomol finish, which was a nitrocellulose finish. We developed it ourselves, so we had the sort of monopoly on it. And even at Wimbledon, we used to grind our own pigments We used to make all of the nitrocellulose, sometimes using old film from Pinewood Studios, and melt that down and make it. And it was a washable finish. So the older leathers you very often get is much firmer, much thicker because of the style of trim. But also used to use very heavy embossed grains as well. And you can see on here where there's a very heavy grain here with black underneath, and then we've rubbed a light grey colour down into the grain to give a bit of contrast.
And this is what's called an interse, isn't it?
You could call it an interse, or we use the term we use for it is Luxan grain, where that's done by hand. It's rubbed. It's quite a skilled job. You rub the colour down into the grain so that it only is in the valleys.
So it's two colours essentially.
It's two colours, yes, And then the Vomol is this, which has no stamped grain. It's completely natural, and this is a VM3015. Also a very popular colour at Ferrari. This was over the years.
Yes.
Very popular.
But obviously different parts have different grains because it's natural.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is the trimmer's nightmare, trying to match one bit up to another.
Yes, but I always, obviously I would say that, but I always say that's part of the beauty of it.
I agree,
because, I think some modern leathers in modern cars are sort of over-engineers and everything's so homogeneous that it's very difficult to tell where the leather starts and the plastic finishes. So we try to only make leathers that are sort of natural because, of course, that's what I've always done.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is natural grain.
Completely natural grain. So they're the very best Northern European hides that we use for this, with the fewest amount of natural marks. Some people call them flaws, but of course I call them natural characteristics. But and every car should have some in, because obviously your customer needs to know that it is the real thing.
Exactly. I do remember reading in a Silver Shadow 2 brochure that they specifically chose cows from Norway, in particular, because they didn't have barbed wire fences.
Well, that's true. In those days, the UK raw material was not good enough, really, from a point of view of amount of scars and things like that. It's much, much better now. But in those days, for Rolls-Royce, we used to buy the raw hides from Scandinavia because the cattle were, obviously in the winter, they were kept indoors and they were looked after better, really. And so the hides were cleaner and we had a much better average of in the sortation.
And what's the third one you've brought along?
The third one is a sort of modern interpretation of Vomol, where we've got the natural grain, if you can see, and that's not embossed, that's developed into the grain. And then to give a bit of contrast, the tips of the grain a slightly different gloss level to the base of the grain. Right. So, and you can see how the light catches
it's sort of sparkly almost.
Yeah, and if it's applied in a motor car correctly without pulling it out too much, then the touch is fantastic. Aroma is lovely, and it's a very, very lightly finished leather, very natural. And I would like to say this is the modern equivalent of Vomol. So this is the very best of what we do for modern motor cars.
And which car would I have to buy to have that in it, for
example?
Well,
it's quite a new development, and it's being developed for one of our clients specifically, and the launch of it has yet to happen, so I can't really...
Wow, so this is hot off the press then?
Yes, this is happening quite soon, so I hope they'll adopt it in some way, but we'll just have to wait and see.
So we can't actually say which car is
No, I can't.
Oh, wow, gosh, so that really is from... This is right up to 2021, we're talking.
It is, yeah.
So this says furniture upholstery.
Yeah, so Vomol was used not only in the motor industry, it was used, the House of Parliament, that's Vomol. In the House of Commons is 3253, and in the House of Lords it's 3195.
Really?
Yeah. So when we redid it after the war, the whole thing was redone, and that's all done in Vomol. So it was an all-round upholstery leather, really. It was just because 80% of our business was automotive.
Right.
But in fact, the QE2 had a lot of sort of Vomol in it, and all sorts of public buildings, and
gosh, quite incredible.
Even the Blue Train in South Africa.
Really?
Yes.
Which is still running, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't know whether it's still got Vomol in it, but it did when it was first started. It was.
Well, we've got a seat here from a Ferrari 308 that we've got in for work, a fiberglass 308, and even I know this is VM 8500, the black. And you can see it's very black because it's the original nitrocellulose finish. It's got a depth to it, hasn't it?
Well, it's also because, I mean, nowadays we can't use solvent-based finishes, so we have to use water-based. But for the Vomol we recreate now, it's about the gloss level. And a lot of modern leathers are very matte. They have very low gloss levels. And so if you make a red or a black with those sort of gloss levels, it sort of almost make the colour look chalky.
Right.
And the matting agent in the lacquer does that. So we have a way of, with a modern lacquer, to be able to give it that strength of colour. And just by changing the gloss level, you can make a black look very black and a red much richer. So a modern red in a modern motor car is by definition very matte and very milked off and doesn't have the real thing. And that's why it's sometimes, if you look at an original Vomol colour like this black, it's a very deep black.
Yeah.
And it's mostly due to the gloss level.
Amazing. Well, just to go back to, obviously, Rolls-Royce at Crewe, it was very bang, 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 bang. You know, they used 3234, which they call beige a lot in silver clouds and shadows and things. But with Italy, I suspect it was a bit more interesting. I mean, Ferrari were probably quite regimented in the way they did things, I would venture to say. Quite good at record keeping.
Yeah.
But how was... did you do business with Ferruccio Lamborghini, for example? Because we restore a lot of Lamborghinis, so I'm just curious.
Yes, we did. I think in their earlier cars, they wouldn't necessarily buy leather from the same place every time.
Yeah.
So certainly there were Lamborghinis out there that originally had our leather in, but certainly not all of them. Sometimes might get a client who had a Ferrari and wanted a Lamborghini as well and said, I want to have the same leather that's in my Ferrari in my Lamborghini. Sometimes that would happen.
Or a lot of early Miuras got retrimmed because the quality was so poor of them.
And quite often they might have used furniture leather in the car, which wasn't quite up to being in a motor car. There are different requirements, so and that could have happened. Certainly.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Now I notice you've got a rather interesting looking tube over there. what have you got there?
Well, it's a drawing that W.Heath Robinson did for us, and it's a copy of a very rare colour picture that he did for us, and it's his interpretation of what he called ConnollyLand, which actually has the River Wandle which is the river that ran through our factory in Wimbledon, and so it's quite. You know, it's an amusing sort of...
This is a Where's Wally, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Wonderful. A wonderful Where's Wally. In Wimbledon.
In Wimbledon, exactly.
Edit that bit out. Okay, great.
Right.
Now, of course, I don't want to embarrass you, but you have got a Royal Warrant, have you not?
Yes, we have.
And this yearbook, which happened to have brought along, would you mind just showing us a couple of pictures in here as well?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the fact that sort of Vomol wasn't just used in motor cars. I mean, it was used obviously in the House of Parliament, as we've mentioned before, as the House of Lords, and for Her Majesty's coronation, they made a special reception area at the Abbey, and the doors that she went through are covered in Vomol, so as you can see here. And so there are all sorts of projects, sort of aircraft, buses, everything really. And
you said the Old Bailey was also your...
Yes, I think somewhere in here. Well, there's the Royal Yacht Britannia there, and here's the Old Bailey. Yeah, so. Most of that would have been Vomol too.
So the last thing they sat on before being sentenced to whatever was your leather, basically?
Yes, absolutely.
What sort of a claim to fame is that?
Well, I don't know really, but I think the judges sat on it. I'm not sure the defendant did.
They're down the pecking order.
I think, maybe they were just on a wooden chair, possibly.
Yes.
So,
very interesting. And you brought something else I'm noticing out the corner of my eye there.
Oh, yes. This is more in my time.
This is an original
Well, yeah, this is an original brochure for the McLaren F1, and
it's probably worth thousands in its own right, isn't it?
Well, I have no idea, but I understand the cars themselves have somewhat appreciated
Just slightly
in value.
Yes.
But Peter Stevens, who is an old friend from the Lotus days, he rang me once and said, I'm designing a car for McLaren and Gordon Murray's in charge of the project. And obviously it was the F1 project. And he said, I think we should put some Connolly Leather in it. So he said, but one word of warning. He said, Gordon, the first thing he'll do if you bring a hide in, he'll take it away and he'll weigh it. So I said, okay, fine, no problem. So I arrived, a lovely chat, terribly and unbelievably exciting project, and it's great to be involved in it. So interesting for a petrol head like me to be involved in it over the years. And sure enough, when I went into the office to talk to Gordon about it with a hide that we thought would be good for the car, he immediately took it away and weighed it. And he came back and he said, can you make it lighter? I said, of course. He said, we'll make a special lightweight leather for you, Gordon. He said, oh, how interesting. How are you going to do that? I said, we'll just make it thinner. So, it was quite straightforward. We just made the leather thinner and it was a bit lighter. And he thought I was going to come up with some sort of a highly technical way of doing it. I'll just make it thinner and it'll be lighter.
Because normally it's about 1.1 mil, something like that?
No, it varies, but I mean, modern leathers are about 1.2 millimeter. Vomol is 1.3.
Right.
Some of the very older leathers are sort of 1.5, 1.5.
So what did you?
That was under a millimeter. Wow. For the F1. So, and I can't remember how many of the original cars had ours in, but we made special colour for it, 2 special colours for it.
Well, of course, it's a bit of a scramble to get into an F1. You actually have to manoeuvre yourself across one seat just to get in the thing.
Yes, it is. I was lucky enough to drive XP5. But in my youth, one of the best motoring days I ever had at Castle Combe, and the engine was staggering. But I never had any clue that they would go on to be what some people say the modern day GTO.
Yeah. That, I suspect, is probably worth a lot of money. That I've been involved with F1s before over the years, and but I've never ever seen an original sales brochure. That is special.
Oh well.
Don't be giving that away.
No, I won't.
But if it isn't in your collection when you get back home, don't be too concerned about it.
I'll make sure it's in there before I leave.
Jonathan, thank you so much.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much to Jonathan for travelling all this way to share a bit of his family history with us. And please like, please share, please subscribe. Hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll be back again with something else soon.